We'll probably have some more folks in a second. Awesome. And if you could please unmute yourselves, that way we have minimal feedback. We'd appreciate that. Um, but welcome to our conversation today, Anarchist Traditions of Bookstores and Zines. We're having today, this conversation is more so a little bit of a tribute to the Afro-Asian Bookshop in Buffalo, New York. And we have to have that conversation. We have a few folks joining us today. We're waiting on Miss Geraldine Pointer, who is important because as we're going to be talking about the Afro-Asian Bookshop, we're going to be mentioning Martin Sostre a lot and the campaign for Martin Sostre and for Miss Geraldine Pointer for their exoneration is ongoing right now. And we have folks that can talk a little bit more about that. So with us today, I do this in alphabetical order usually. Ms. Geraldine Pointer, who's going to be joining us, as I mentioned. We have, Lorenzo Camboa Irving. I think it requires very little introduction, but I'll still do it anyway. Writer, author of Anarchism and the Black Revolution, co-host of the Black Autonomy podcast, and many things, a comrade and friend as well. With us as well, we have Dr. Tiana U. Wilson, who, as if you folks have not already read it, did a really incredible article on Hammer and Hope magazine covering not just the campaign for exoneration, but also Miss Geraldine Pointer. And I'm just going to read a little blurb here. Dr. Tiana U. Wilson, also known as Professor T, is a co-founder of the Buffalo Syllabus, member of the Justice for Geraldine Pointer and Martin Sostre campaign, and a historian of Black American women's radicalism and internationalism. She's also an assistant professor of Africana Studies at the University of Pittsburgh. Professor T's academic and public writing has appeared in numerous venues, including the Journal of African American History, Women's Studies Quarterly, Oxford Bibliographies in African American Studies, and Hammer and Hope, as mentioned. And also with us, William C. Anderson, who is also a producer and a part of the Black Autonomy podcast. If folks are not familiar, please run, don't walk to this really important podcast. And to read a little bio also, William C. Anderson is a writer and activist from Birmingham, Alabama. His work has appeared in The Guardian, MTV, British Journal of Photography, Logix, parentheses, magazine, and Prism, where he's a monthly columnist at Prism. He is the author of The Nation on No Map and co-author of As Black as Resistance. He's also the co-founder, of Offshoot Journal and provides creative direction as a producer of the Black Autonomy podcast. His writings have been included in anthologies such as Who Do You Serve, Who Do You Protect, and No Selves to Defend. Thank you all for being here. And I'm Natalie, and I'm one-third the cooperative of Black Lantern Co-op, which is a Black radical Pan-Africanist, and trying to beat the allegations, but we also are mostly anarchist bookstore in some ways. It's hard to say, it's hard to Black anarchist bookstores, y'all. And you might have, we might have cross paths around political prisoner organizing, as well as in a local chapter of Black Autonomy here in LA. Most of us are focused in South Central, where our bookstore is in Inglewood, right next to it. But yeah, that's just a quick introduction. Anything you all want to add about yourselves before we jump in? No? Okay. Y'all are nice. So we're having this conversation today. And maybe Tiana, I can like jump, like ask for your support on this. This week is an anniversary, right? We're also maybe a grim anniversary, but it marks the time when Martin Sostre and Geraldine Pointer were arrested in a frame up for their work at the Afro-Asian Bookshop. So maybe we can pull you in. Would you like to give us a little bit of a background on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, welcome everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm very grateful to have this panel. So, this is our first time that the campaign has had like some sort of like national attention or like Well, I mean, we have had like online panels, but we're just super excited to collaborate with Black Lantern Co-op. And so I'm here to represent the campaign. And so I'll provide a little bit of information about the frame up as well as our different initiatives with the campaign. So Martin Sostre, he opened Buffalo's first kind of like revolutionary radical bookstore, which was called the Afro-Asian Bookshop, which was located at 1412 Jefferson Avenue in 1965, which was on the city's east side. This is a predominantly Black neighborhood that is still predominantly Black to this day. So this pioneering space quickly became an educational and political hub where Black residents could learn about Black history, culture, and liberation movements, not just happening nationally, right, with the Black Power movement, but liberation movements and third world solidarity movements happening across the world. And then Geraldine Pointer, who then went by Geraldine Robinson, she managed Soul Strait's second location, which was the East West Bookshop, which was located at 289 High Street. And she worked along Soul Strait at the Afro-Asian Bookshop. She also, at the time of their arrest, was romantically involved with him for about a year at that point. And so she played equally a foundational role in contributing to the bookstore's mission of empowering Buffalo's Black community through knowledge exchange as well as political awareness. And so as these bookstores gained prominence and began shaping Black political consciousness, different local law enforcement intensify surveillance that targets So Straight and Pointer. And so in the like 15-minute documentary frame up, So Straight mentioned like FBI informants like coming into his store a month, harassing him a month before his arrest. And then their arrest, which occurred on July 15th of 1967, which was at the Afro-Asian bookstore, was just 2 weeks after the Buffalo Rebellion, which was basically a local uprising in response to police brutality, housing segregation, and racial inequality. And I'm happy to discuss Sostray's role in the uprising as far as kind of protecting, those who were protesting. But the police really wanted to get him for quote unquote inciting a riot. And so they charged him with narcotics possession, arson, resisting arrest, and assault. And Pointer, who was also arrested that night, she faced charges of selling narcotics and interfering with an arrest. And so, despite dubious evidence framing So Straight and Pointer, which at this time also included a later recanted police informant's testimony, So Straight, he was convicted by an all-white jury and sentenced to 31 to 41 years in prison. And then Pointer received a 7 to 15 year suspended sentence and then a 1 to 3 year sentence. And during her incarceration, Pointer lost custody of her 5 children, but she was reunited with them upon her release 2.5 years later. And So Stray was granted executive clemency in December of 1975. And which was basically about 9 years after being incarcerated. And then he was released in February of 1976. And so Stray and Pointer's incarcerations basically deprive the community of a significant educational and cultural resource and halted the momentum of the Afro-Asian bookshop and its role in promoting Black empowerment and social justice in Buffalo. And so 57 years later, and 1 year ago from today, our Justice for Geraldine Pointer and Martin Sostre campaign launched a movement that I have been active in since last August. And so we currently have 4 different initiatives. The first one and most important is seeking to pressure the Erie County District Attorney, Michael Keane, to exonerate Martin Sostre, who's no longer with us, and then Geraldine Pointer, who is still with us. She's 81, which we understand as a necessary step towards seeking justice, but also reparations, right, for this wrongdoing. And so we can discuss later about the status of our exoneration application later because it has been a mess, of course, with these politicians doing what they do best, trying to evade accountability. But yeah, and then the second initiative out of the four is that we continue to kind of see ourselves within the revolutionary and intellectual tradition of the Afro-Asian bookshop. And so we do so by organizing and facilitating spaces for political education of the Black youth in Buffalo. And so we are currently in the middle of hosting our first Freedom Summer School, which I'm happy to discuss further if folks are interested in learning more. And then the third one is that we aim to cement Pointer and Sostray's contributions within local historical and political memory while simultaneously raising the political consciousness of Black Buffalo. And so we just received a grant to support our mural project and will host a community input day this Tuesday in Buffalo. So we're super excited about that. And then our last initiative is we are currently reclaiming the site of where the Afro-Asian bookshop once stood. Right now, it is a vacant lot. And so we have coordinated and collaborated with different local residents to kind of reimagine the space for the benefits of the Cold Springs community. And so today we have a community garden there. We host events like the Juneteenth block party and different political education sessions. So I'm a Buffalo native, born and raised, grew up on the East Side. My family is there, still very much in the East Side. And so this history definitely means a lot to me. And so thank you all for being here and helping us live within the legacy of the Afro-Asian bookshop and support our efforts to exonerate both Martin Sostre and Geraldine Pointer, who is still with us, who will be joining us in a few.
Yeah, thank you so much for that background. It's actually such a crucial part of this conversation that it's really important just to kind of name the Afro-Asian bookstore, the East-West bookshop, the relationship between Geraldine and Martin, whether it's like politically, romantically, communally, etc. And I hope we really can get really deep into that today. So I know some folks are just joining us. Welcome. Just please mute yourselves to prevent too much interaction there. And so before we like jump into the discussions, I just wanted to kind of like lay place for some of this, how we got here, right? We, and by we, I mean all of us that know each other on this call have always been engaging in conversations around the importance of Black radical spaces, radical bookstores, anarchist bookstores, as a way to mitigate the ongoing censorship of our histories. Now, this is nothing new. I know that it feels really assertive right now that we're seeing so much like fascism in our faces so explicitly, but it's nothing new and it's something that we've always known about. So I just want to take us back really, really far back, just a quick minute. The first Black-owned bookstore in this country, in this occupied territory, was started by a man named David Ruggles. And it was actually kind of like a market. This is in New York, downtown. This is a Black man who was an abolitionist. Like, in some cases, people would say a hardcore abolitionist. I don't know what that means, but you know what I mean? Some of his other abolitionist homies were just like, oh, he might be doing too much. But he was also known as like one of the conductors of the Underground Railroad, was a stop along the way, and had this bookstore that was very clearly, it was actually not centrally a bookstore, it just became one later, but it was very clearly abolition literature focused, which of course, as now we can imagine, speaking in the past tense, not only because of in the 1800s, it had been around maybe 2 years before it was incinerated by a mob of white terrorists. So this is our first moment this is our first that we know of Black-owned bookstore. And it was centrally located downtown Manhattan. And it was also a marketplace. And it was also subject to the same legacy that we see over and over again in these spaces. So we must inspect a little bit, not just on this call, but generally why it's considered such a threat to have places like this. And in fact, Black-owned bookstores And radical spaces were considered one of the first targets by COINTELPRO, even actually, and we can talk about Afro-Asian Bookshop. That was 1967 when they were arrested, and it was in 1968 that officially we have mention that by J. Edgar Hoover, we need to crack down on Black-owned bookstores. So even when they have things on paper, we know that it had happened well before, right? So just kind of naming those things. So Black-owned bookstores, the radical kind, rather, anarchist bookstores have always been a target for the role that they play in creating more of a popular education, more of a ease of like, accessibility to literature, to, liberation text. So I think, it shouldn't be a surprise to us to hear about this frame up, the so-called narcotics case that Martin Sostre and Miss Geraldine Pointer had at the time for them, because like we've heard this over and over again. So with that, I just wanted to kind of just set the foundation. I also want to name that like Lorenzo's book, before it was published by Pluto Press, my understanding was that it was just a book that was circulating around prisons, right? Both as a zine form, as a booklet form. People just like knew of this clandestinely, and it was a great move for Pluto Press among, just the general Black left like literature. It was a great move to move this work forward. And I know that, William, I definitely want to pick your brain a little bit about that. So, William and Lorenzo, William, because you do the introduction, right? So we want to kind of get into that. So I don't want to like stall us anymore. Maybe we can just kind of jump into conversation like more so organically. I can't wait till Miss Geraldine is able to join us to see what her experience was like at the store physically. But yeah, I don't know if you want to take it away, Tiana, Wilson, Lorenzo. I'll mute myself.
Yeah, I'll jump in off of something that you said there that I feel is really important to acknowledge. I mean, so many of the connections from all of the history that Tiana just laid out, as well as what you just shared, Natalie, is like making me think about how Martin's bookstore, how the Afro-Asian bookshop, I think for me, it represents a kind of bigger picture thing about Martin's life and his trajectory over time. How he was someone who, as I've learned more about him from Lorenzo and just in my own readings and my own attention to his development, he does something really interesting, which is he draws from these different aspects of radicalism. And so I know that like one of the really important things that I think Garrett Felber points out in his new book, Continuous Struggle, about Martin's life is that he's inspired by Michaud's bookstore in Harlem, which is a famous black bookstore, legendary black bookstore, and I think in a kind of true Martin Sostre fashion, he takes and converges this part of the Black radical tradition that we can identify with Michaud's bookstore, and he brings in these other elements of his own development. And I think that is really interesting because what he was doing is he was creating this space in the community for radicalism and for political education that we can identify within this kind of larger sort of anarchist tradition of bookstores and print culture and zines. And he provides this space not only for organizing, but for self-reflection and this sort of like critical development that this type of literature really lays the foundation for. And so when we look at like these bookstores, when we look at like zines, when we look at these radical texts and the spaces that really facilitate that, it's important to kind of, I think, recognize them, especially within the anarchist tradition as a place for clarification, for us to be able to understand what's needed to like push radicalism forward, for us to be able to push movements forward, for us to be able to push struggle forward. It's not just about any sort of like armchair kind of like radicalism or just sitting back and just doing like endless commentary and getting too lost in just observing from outside. It's also a place to really like actively think about how we can grow and how we can evolve. And Martin exemplifies that in his life. And for him to be an educator and somebody who had a bookstore where he could really concentrate that type of energy is extremely important. And that's the first place I ever really was able to understand um, anarchism at a surface level, was in an anarchist bookstore when I picked up Rudolph Rocker's Anarcho-Syndicalism pamphlet because a guy working the counter said, try that. And I just picked it up. And then obviously I meet Lorenzo later, and Lorenzo gives me his perspective, which is much more clarifying. So I just think that it's important to just lay that out, that this is a place for where we can evolve and grow. And I see Miss Geraldine just joined. Hey, Miss Geraldine.
So, hello, how are you?
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Hey, Miss G.
How you doing, Sister Geraldine? Ramsey, how you doing?
Good, good. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of say that those things came to mind. Maybe Lorenzo, you can. I don't know. Like I was kind of hoping that maybe Lorenzo, you could speak to the like. I feel like we don't get to hear that from you as much. Like maybe you could talk a little bit about your um experience with like read, because you're such a reader, and like I feel like whenever I'm talking to you, whether we're doing like these events or anything else, I feel like I always want to hear you speak more about your reading and like your relationship to zines and like print culture and like all of these different aspects of like maybe you know um, the anarchist relationship to all of these things in terms of political education and movement and struggle, including like creating such a like revolutionary text in the culture. Can you share some about that, Lorenzo? I don't know if that's something you can go into right now, but I would love it if you would.
Well, I'm not sure what particular literature you're talking about, but having met Martin, first of all, expanded my thinking as far as anarchist politics, anarchist ideology. Because at first I was a critic and someone that didn't see anarchist politics in the '60s as being anything more than pranksterism, at least in the United States. And it was after talking to him and after, having contact with him and everything, that I began to have a deeper understanding of it. And of course, he had educated me about the bookstore and how he'd gotten locked up and all that, because I didn't know anything about any of that. I didn't even know anything about him. I was, first of all, I was from a small town in the South, and then was also out of the country for a considerable period of that year of 1969, and so having met with him, the first thing he told me was always pick up a book, which I did that anyway. I was reading revolutionary literature before, I had gotten involved with the movement back in 68, 69, when I got out of the military and all of that. Um, but he always put emphasis on picking up a book. He would tell other prisoners that he would come in contact with, pick up a book, and that was a means of beginning to understand the world and understand political theories, complicated political theories. His thing was always saying that he wanted to make complicated political theories plain. so that people would begin to understand the same thing that these intellectuals and others inside movements understood. And he always put emphasis, when he did talk about the bookstore to me, he talked about it as in terms of bringing youth and community forces together. And of course, I wasn't in Buffalo to see all this, but I understood what he was saying because this was happening in a lot of places. Black people were being politically educated in these institutions, black bookstores, better than they were in, you know, government-run institutions like schools. And so my anarchist political education really started with meeting Martin, and then having him push me and uplift me in terms of political theory, and understanding anarchism as a political theory first, and then understanding it as having a specific history, and especially when I heard about the anarchist portion of the Russian Revolution, for instance. And of course later even in Spain and other places, I knew nothing about this. I didn't even know anything about the struggle inside the United States, the anarchist struggle inside the United States, because Black people or the Black community were not part of those struggles for the most part. I mean, there was maybe one or two persons who might show up in terms of, but the Black struggle was not really part of the anarchist politics. And so that was something I always thought about. Well, that was something I started talking to him about. And one of the first things that he told me was that, because I had this idea, as many Black people did, that anarchism didn't have anything to do with the Black struggle. They're not even concerned about the Black struggle that was taking place in America at that time, and so forth. And so he was able to give me a basic understanding of how, one, anarchism is a universal political theory. It's not just something, some white radical thing, or something for the upper classes. It was in fact a movement of the lower classes, of poor people. And he explained all these things, and we had political discussions over the course of the 2 or 3 months I had in the New York State or New York Federal Prisons facility there while I was there before they shipped me down south. But he was able to make me understand in terms of discussions. And he was very much like a teacher. I don't know that he ever did teach formally, but he was very much like a teacher. And we used to have a board, that he would write on, and would lay out theories and ideas for me, and that's how I started. And then from there, I started reading on my own. He had books and had contacts for me of people he had dealt with, anarchists and others that he dealt with all over the world. And that began my formal education in anarchist political theories. But it didn't come from a book, an individual book alone, but his urging me and his explaining to me what all these theories meant, firsthand, and then continuing the discussion over long years of time. It was 10 years before I wrote Anarchism and the Black Revolution. I had been in prison 10 years and had been studying in all that time. So, I know what I was talking about when I did write the original version of Anarchism and the Black Revolution in 1979. And it made me have an understanding of the importance of Martin Luther as a thinker, as a revolutionary thinker, and the bookstore as a project. And of course, I wasn't there, but it didn't matter. He would make you understand the importance of something by describing it in terms that you understood, where you were at that particular moment politically. I was coming back to America from having been kidnapped in Germany by the American forces, and he knew that I was disillusioned about the movement. We talked about this. I was disillusioned about the movement, the civil rights movement, the Black Power, and all this. All these, even the Black Panther Party, and all these movements had failed spectacularly in so many different ways. And authoritarian nature of these groups and the skullduggery they were engaged in had a lot to do with my attitude in seeking new revolutionary ideas. He knew this, and so we talked at length about a lot of this stuff over the course of time that I was there in New York, and that changed my life, changed my political focus and direction, and it had a long term impact on me that lasts to this day. Anything else?
No, that makes total sense. And I think that you clarified a lot in terms of like the political education aspect. So yeah, thanks for that, Lorenzo. Tiana, I saw you came off mute. I don't know if you were about to.
Yeah, I definitely just wanted to bring Miss Geraldine into the conversation. And so Miss Geraldine, I hope you're doing okay. I know it's hot as ever in Buffalo right now.
Yeah,
Um,
it is hot.
but if you could share a little bit more with us all about your role with the bookstore and your relationship to Martin prior to being arrested.
Well, my relationship with Martin, Martin was he was my man back then, my boyfriend, and we lived together. And I helped him with the bookstore, and he helped me with my children. I worked at the bookstore that was on Orange and High Street. I worked there selling records, African figurines, and different African art there at the bookstore. The bookstore was so profitable on Orange Street, it helped pay the rent on the one on Jefferson. That's how good it was doing because we started selling the 45 rhythm and blues, and like a lot of the people in the neighborhood, the fruit belt back then was young and into rhythm and blues and the black music, and I made sure we had plenty of it there, and it sold very well. Just like I said, it sold so good, it would help support the store on Jefferson.
Mm-hmm. And I think Miss Geraldine's role on the High Street location and the significance of, that location kind of bringing in the revenue to support the Afro-Asian bookshop that had all the literature is for us to think about bookstores and the importance that they play in culture as well, beyond just like distributing literature and thinking about the variety of like intellectual production that goes beyond like the written text. And so thinking about the role of like music, art, paintings, and how that also was a way to kind of bring young folks in to learn a little bit more about, the Black freedom struggle.
Exactly, and you know what? Back then, it helped them learning things about their neighborhood as far as the politicians and the things that they were doing to the black neighborhood to keep the people down.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome.
And then I also just wanted to kind of pick up on what Lorenzo and William was talking about as far as Sostre kind of being an educator, a teacher. And so through this work with the campaign, one of the most rewarding experiences have been meeting, now community elders who knew Martin Sostre, who went to the bookstore, and them sharing their experience, them being they come from a variety of different backgrounds, right? You had white students from the local university, University of Buffalo. You also had Black students who were also UB students, but also like local Black residents who would go go into the Afro-Asian bookstore to kind of receive the radical literature that was not accessible at these ivory towers or at these more elite institutions. And so Miss Karima Amin, who is also involved in our campaign, she talks about how Martin Sostre was one of her first kind of Black radical educators who introduced her to revolutionary theory, but he would also allow for her to kind of sit down in his bookstore and read the literature. So she didn't even have to purchase it. So it kind of operated as a library too. You also had folks who would just use it as a community space. And so I think about Arto Williams, who unfortunately was the person that the police used to frame Martin Sostre and Geraldine Pointer. But the reason why he entered the bookstore, felt so comfortable, and Martin Sostre didn't see him as a threat when he entered the bookstore, was that he had previously visited the bookstore. And Martin Sostre had a reputation with him. And so sometimes Martin Sostre would allow him, to use the restroom for free, or, would drop off his coat and like leave it there while he, go and hang out in the streets and or whatever. And so thinking about the collective space of a radical bookstore that is so essential to kind of like community repair, but also the ways that like the state recognize that and sees it as a threat and will do everything to kind of destroy it. And so I think about during the Buffalo Rebellions, learning about how the police collaborated with the fire department to hose down the Afro-Asian bookstore as they were quote unquote putting out a fire in a nearby business. So all the streets along Jefferson were, up in flames during the 1967 uprising that lasted about 5 days. And so they used that opportunity to hose down the literature of the bookstore. So thinking about, the white people and the state recognizing the threat, the real threat of like when Black people kind of come together and like study and knowledge exchange and learn not just about like what it means to be and operate in the belly of the beast, but also like the critically assess the US role in the world and its global empire too. So I think it's really relevant in thinking about solidarity beyond just our nation state.
Yeah, something you said there that just made me think too was talking about how this person who ended up being an informant and leading to their framing was somebody who felt comfortable enough to be welcome into the space. And it makes me think about a kind of interesting thing I think about so many like particularly anarchist bookstores and radical bookstores, even anarchist book fairs, um, and how there's really um, an openness a lot of times, I think, to just general education and understanding in the sense that when you go into a lot of these spaces, depending, not all of them, but a lot of them, there is a number of different types of text relating to different ideologies and different branches of sort of left radicalism and different schools of thought. And I know personally that I appreciate the ability for people to welcome different schools and different denominations of left thought that they may not even agree with, even if it's from a critical place. And I don't think that that has to be something that is threatening in terms of like understanding. It's just generally important for us to read. It's generally important for us to understand. And again, to have these spaces, as I was trying to point out earlier, for self-clarification and reflection. So I think that um, ultimately, like going back to Martin again, thinking about how he came through the Nation of Islam and had this relationship with the nation who we know is also very big about their own culture around printing and political education and books with their newspaper, The Final Call, and so on and so forth. Um, just bringing all of that history forward to create a space where he had a number of different ideas represented, I think is extremely important to recognize because I know that in some of the writings and some of the interviews I've um, looked at from Martin, he's talked about, having Maoist literature and talking about it being inspired by Che Guevara. Even though I'm sure, he at that point in his development, he wouldn't necessarily have um, been an ideologue or drawn from those people in a specific kind of more dogmatic context. He was definitely moving forward. So I just really appreciate how those spaces can be open to a lot of different people, a lot of different ideas, and a lot of different sects of leftism, because I think that it's very necessary for us to grow and ultimately build beyond all of that. I think we just
Yeah, to your point, Lorenzo, William, maybe Miss Geraldine and Lorenzo could kind of like touch a little bit on that. Because the Afro-Asian bookshop and the East-West bookshop were not explicitly anarchist bookstores at the time, right? They were mostly in the general Black liberation tradition. My understanding is that a lot of the Martin Sostre like Black anarchism that we are familiar with now happened after his incarceration, and he'd been part of the Nation of Islam as well, and other Black nationalist organizations. So maybe Lorenzo and Geraldine, if you want to touch on that a little bit, like what did the book? Well, for Miss Geraldine, what were the books selections like? Like I'm assuming we're imagining like a variety of subjects, and then also for Lorenzo. What were some of the books that you did really discover in conversation with Martin? Like what was the first book of like anarchism that he kind of lent to you, or just generally speaking? Maybe we can start with you, Miss Geraldine, about yeah, just kind of like what are some of the subject matters that were in the store.
We had books like about Black history for the community to learn what happened in the past, and he would discuss things like what happened in the past, so it won't be so hard for people in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep, Malcolm X for one.
And I imagine Malcolm X was like a really popular book at the time, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it was.
And it still is,
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah, and for you, Lorenzo, yeah, could you touch a little bit on that? Like what were some of the book recommendations that you got, and like what were those conversations like?
Well, probably the first book that one of the first books, strangely enough, that he had me read was a book on the Russian Revolution, the anarchist phase of the Russian Revolution, by an author called Volin, and it's called The Unknown Revolution. That was the first book I read. The first book that was sent to me while I was in prison, and he spoke highly of that book. He said, "You will get a lot of it because of where you just left," which meaning I just left Eastern Europe, and he wanted me to have an understanding of a phase of the Russian Revolution that took place that I didn't know anything about, and most people in the Western world didn't know very much about. And so I read that, and I still have that book. In fact, it, you know, I don't know through all the times I went through in prison and all of that. That's still I still have that one book. I made sure I got out of prison. If I didn't get out of prison with any other books, I would get out with that book. And it's an extremely important volume to give an understanding of a world important historical moment that had a phase to it that it wasn't successful. There was a revolution and a civil war that took place, and the anarchists were crushed as a result of the establishment of authoritarian regime. With and he talked about this. He talked about another book on there's a book written by a person who was hooked up with the Che wing of the Cuban Revolution, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a book written about it, and he wanted me to read that book because he said you need to get an alternative historical perspective in addition to what the people who ran the government told you. The people who ran the Cuban government were one thing, and then he said that the other forces, the other left forces that were crushed by the authoritarian regime was something else. And he went to talking about this and even had his own ideas or had a perspective on how Che Guevara was killed and why he was killed and some things he objected to in the Cuban government, as it was being run, as it was being constructed. And so we talked about that, and then there were a variety of books I read. I had over 200 something books when I got out of prison, ultimately, and the majority, a large percentage of them were anarchist books. I think that one of the things that we did to change the conditions in prison, and I learned this from Martin Sostre specifically, was to build what effectively was a mass movement against censorship. He filed lawsuits in New York against the New York state system, and he was successful. And that spurred us to then file lawsuits, people who would follow his case and people like me who had contact with him, to file lawsuits all over the federal and state prison systems in the United States. And so that effectively censorship as a policy in all the prisons was destroyed. And we were able to build lending libraries inside the prisons, so the prisoners could give books to other prisoners and so forth, something that had been unheard of and disallowed. In fact, we were able to have discussion groups and cultural studies programs and all these things which stem from the destruction and the fight against censorship. And so we had effectively a bookstore inside the prison. We could give the books to whoever we wanted to read them. We could go into even solitary confinement and give them to prisoners there. Even during the riot, even that took place then, I was in solitary, and they were able to distribute books to me and others. That program was so strong, and it was so well liked and supported by the prisoners, and not just black prisoners, because at the time even white prisoners started asking for books, and Mexicanos and others, Latinx people and others were asking for these books as well. So it started to unite the entire prison population, to politically educate the entire prison population. So these kinds of things are important too. It isn't just on the streets where the bookstore or the power of books was able to transform the conditions and transform the minds of the people who read them. It was, even in places as fearsome as the prisons themselves. The lessons I learned from Martin Sostre and the work I did in terms of fighting censorship was a direct carryover from what he taught me and the direction. And he had given me specific instructions on what to do when I did go to prison. He knew I was going to prison. And I was going to the South, and I was going to be before an all-white jury and all that. He knew I was going to prison. He said, use your time in prison to build something, to build a movement, to fight censorship, because if you can fight censorship and destroy censorship, you can open the doors to a lot of people, and you can build organization of long standing that can change the conditions that people have to live under in prisons. I first went to prison. You were not allowed to have revolutionary literature. You were only allowed to have the Bible, and that was the King James version. If you had any other version, they would allow you to have it. So the fight dis, destroy their entire regime, the entire system they had of censorship to prevent you from reading these, to prevent you from getting revolutionary ideas. We destroyed that. We ideologically defeated it, and we were able to then organize the prisoners as a class. And it changed that whole period of history. So the struggle was not just the bookstores on the inside. You had other forms of the book as a weapon, the book as a weapon on the outside, in the prisons as well, was transformed the prison. So his ideas carried a long way. I can only say that I knew about, what happened in the prisons, but the effect on the outside and the inside is what made Martin Sostre, as far as the state was concerned, a dangerous man. And of course, Sister Geraldine was a fierce follower. They wanted to destroy her too if they could. They wanted to punish them, and they understood that the books in a bookstore is not just a building; it's a cultural and economic and political institution to empower the community, both psychologically and politically, and even economically. There are people. Some of the first meetings that I know of were held around Black political theories and economic ideas came through Black bookstores. One in New York, that the Schomburg and the other bookstore there you mentioned, and Marcus Books, in 1960 was created around the idea of Marcus Garvey's program and the idea that a bookstore was a tool, a weapon to fight racism and oppression. So, it was important to recognize that. But the bookstore is just an institution linked to the overall Black liberation struggle. That's something I understood a long time ago. It isn't just somewhere you go for retail trade or just to sit down and read a book alone. But the books are ideological weapons. The books essentially kept many of us alive, even in solitary confinement. Years in solitary confinement, the book is the only thing that kept us alive. And the fact that we were able to use the book and force it upon the prison authorities to allow us to give it to another prisoner while he was in solitary confinement transformed many of these people. They came out totally different people. And so that's an important thing to understand. So that was the one thing that Martin Sostre was able to express to me, is that a book is a weapon. It isn't just a piece of paper. It's a weapon. It's something to ideologically lift up the consciousness of the people.
And thank you so much for that, Lorenzo. That is a long book. I just wanted to highlight what William dropped in the chat. That's a very long book. So kudos to you all.
What's a long book?
What is it? Yeah.
Oh, The Unknown Revolution?
Yeah.
It is a long book, but I had a long sentence.
I knew you were about to say that.
Sentences, so I had a long time to read it,
Yeah,
that was the first book I read. That was the only book I had, in fact, at the time. At first, Martin's ideas helped us actually start the Books Through Bars program. And what that was we would write to, after we had secured the right to get the books, through the prison authorities, we would then write to bookstores and book publishing companies, especially radical publishing houses. We would write to them all over the country, in fact, all over the world, and they would send books to us, and that was how we built up our library. And this was happening in a lot of different places, and so it, that was important. It was an important thing to understand about the effect of Martin Sostre. Going way beyond just his contact with me in a small prison, I should say a prison in New York. It spread all over the country.
That's amazing. Maybe Tiana could ask the last question before we open it up for our audience to see what they all think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalie. So Miss Geraldine, could you speak a little bit more about your time incarcerated? So oftentimes when we learn about the Afro-Asian bookstore or Martin Sostre, your story and your sacrifices for the movement is oftentimes overlooked. And so one of the things that captivated me about your story was that on numerous occasions, you were approached to, and I don't want to give it away, but and I want to let you share it, but you were approached to basically kind of like snitch or tell a lie on Martin So Straight in exchange. So if you could share a little bit more about your time incarcerated and what that meant for your family and how during that time, you became politicized as well.
Yes, I remember matter of fact, I was in Albion first, and then they shipped us to Bedford. But when I was in Albion, the first time I went to board, they always asked me, was I ready to tell the truth? And it was the same thing when I went to Bedford and I went to board. They always wanted to know, was I ready to tell the truth? And telling the truth, well, for them was for me to incriminate Martin and say that the things that they had accused us of doing were true and they wasn't, so I couldn't do that. And even when my mother came to visit me with my children, she wanted me to go along with their program so I can come home. But you know what? I made the sacrifice not to do that and do my time, and I waited until all of that was over, and then I came home to my children.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how, like, I think the most significant part about this as well is that, you know, they cut off access to who could write you. And so you had, if you want to share a little bit more about all the different letters that you received once you were out of
Yeah,
prison.
a lot of different letters, and like I said, I shared some of them with you, but I had a lot of other ones that I just kept. Uh, and they came from all over the country, well wishes from people that I didn't even know that sympathized with the case that I was going through for being accused of something and torn away from my children. It made me feel like being a slave and somebody taking your children to sell them to somebody else and they never see them again. That's how I felt.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, this has been a really wonderful. I mean, the problem is that we could be here for another like 3 hours, so maybe we can uh open up to discussion there. I'll say for me, I could definitely be on the call with you all for another 3 hours, and sometimes I have, right, Lorenzo? Um, but yeah, any questions from the audience? We can take Stack if you want to raise your hand. Either drop your name in the chat, or if you can react with like a hand raising, we can call on you. It looks like there's one in the chat from Anarcha Guacamole. It's a little long. Honored to be here. Thank you. I'm an Indian American MA student in Pan African Studies in LA, researching the influence of Black anarchist literature on radical orgs and movements. My question is, how can non-Black scholars approach, continue, and spread the study of Black radicalism? My other question is, in the 1960s, when the bookstore was called the Afro-Asian Bookstore, was Palestine ever framed as a West Asian issue? Did East Asian identities dominate the extent of the Asian influence in the American radical thought due to their communist theories, histories? Were there conversations on radicals in India or Afghanistan or Iran or any other countries in Asia? So yeah, just to bring it down a little bit, how the question is, how can non-Black scholars approach, continue, and spread the study of Black radicalism? And what I gather is the question on the Afro-Asian bookstore. how did the Asian component show up? Was Palestine part of that as West Asia, or what was the general narrative?
I can jump in. So for the first question, in terms of like uh, non-Black scholars approaching and continuing to spread the study of Black radicalism, I would say just do it sincerely and there shouldn't be a problem. I think that if you um, approach it uh, with um, sincerity and are genuine about respecting um, all of these different aspects and really critical parts of of Black history that it will kind of come to you through these living texts and documents and pieces of history. These things that we're talking about, I don't view them as stagnant pieces of scholarship or kind of dead text or um, things that don't have a life of their own. I think that when you're being true to this work and when you're really thinking about the respect that we should have for people like Miss Geraldine on this call, Miss Geraldine just shared with us that she chose to remain incarcerated to be true to protecting the work that they were doing. There's so many people across Black history and across the Black radical tradition who have sacrificed everything, who have put their lives, their families, their freedom, their financial stability, everything on the line, their mental well-being. And when we take into consideration just what it's meant to be Black and to be able to um, do something like read a book. I mean, we're descended from people in this country who had it criminalized for them to be able to read and to be able to go to school. Like there were different points in our history where it was illegal for us to learn. Um, I think that that is part of what I appreciate and respect about not just being a Black person, but coming from a Black family that prioritizes and values education in that way. So I'm all of that to say, um, for someone who isn't Black and who's a scholar, I think that you just have to bring that level of sensitivity and understanding of the weight of Black struggle just to be able to create these materials, to be able to read, to be able to study, and to be able to build around these things has meant risking everything. So you have to bring that level of awareness and consideration into it. And I think because those things are alive, because that history is alive, because these texts are alive, that when you approach it with that level of sincerity and understanding, you'll figure out the rest through a sort of organic process. And the other question, in terms of the the Asian aspect and some of the more maybe broad understandings on the international scale of what Social Straits Bookstore would have meant. I would just recommend, we have the Social Straight Institute website. There's a ton of materials on there. I would definitely recommend getting on there and checking out some of Martin's interviews because he has a fantastic international perspective. He's always talking about not just other countries in terms of like international struggle and bringing in this sort of international solidarity, but um, he also, I think, kind of breaks down borders and barriers through the way he positions himself as a part of struggles in countries and places he's not a part of, like Vietnam, referring to himself as like a Black Viet Cong, and talking about how he's a part of understanding the struggle of political prisoners in places like Palestine. He talks about these things explicitly, and there's a ton of archival materials on the site. that you can go through and really get a deeper perspective around those things. We should have them flagged on there. So definitely check out the Martin Sostre Institute website because you'll be able to do a deep dive with that.
Yeah, that's martinsustray.com, correct, William?
Yes.
And yeah, and just to, I think for me, I just wanted to like name that we're talking about the 60s when Vietnam War was at the forefront of so many liberation movements. So definitely look into that relationship as well, because it feels like that was a also important part of why it's an Afro-Asian bookstore. But yes, martinsustray.com, y'all. And there's one more question in the chat. It looks like it's actually more of a comment from the dugout. It says open-ended, but what lessons learned have y'all been ruminating on as anarchists, radicals, parents, mentors, organizers? Are there any recommendations you have for folks building non-electoral revolutionary organizations and formations, in parentheses, co-ops, bookstore, neighborhood association, mutual aid unions, families, for example? Maybe, actually, I'm curious about the same thing. Like, what sort of lessons learned would you have? I would even say Geraldine with, I think it comes up often that you have 5 children and how that impact of like, not just like your arrest and your incarceration really took a number on how your family was like, not just separated, but like how you were able to kind of get back together. So I don't know if you maybe want to answer to that a little bit. Lessons learned.
Lesson learned. When I was separated from my kid, I had a lot of frustration and hate in my heart because of what was happening with me and my children, them being torn away from me. Just like I said, it made me feel like a slave, and they're taking your children away from you to sell them, and you'll never see them again. I remember when I went to court and I was getting sentenced. One of the sentences was like 1 to 3. One was 7.5 to 15. I think the 7.5 to 15, that was I didn't do that one, but you know what? That's all I heard, and I didn't hear anything else. And I was thinking to myself, when I see my kids again, they'll be grown. I didn't know nothing about being paroled or none of that. I thought I was going to have to do 7 or 15 years in jail. And like I said, all I thought about when I see my kids again, they'll be grown.
Yeah. Anyone else want to answer that before we take our next and last question? Maybe Lorenzo?
Well, the thing that I learned, and this also, it came partially from Martin, but looking at him and learning from him as a revolutionary, and the revolutionary example he gave was to never give up and to always keep fighting and finding a way to fight the state. And so I did 15 years in prison on 2 life sentences. I got out because I fought to get out, and I built a movement to get out. But the thing is to never cooperate with the state, to never allow yourself to be broken, no matter what the conditions. I was in solitary confinement for at least half of the years I was in prison. And, you can, I've seen men broken. I've seen people give up screaming and hollering. I've seen people commit suicide inside the prisons, so I know that, it has a detrimental effect. It's a death camp, really. That's what a prison is. It's a death camp. But the fact that I came along in a certain period of time when the prison struggle was a revolutionary struggle, and the civil rights movement and the new left and all these movements were taking place in the streets, and we were in a revolutionary period. That's what we were in. I'm not saying that we won the revolution, but it was a revolutionary period. People were fighting back in massive numbers, and against the war, against racism, against the same kind of police state terrorism by the pigs uh, that's happening now. That there ain't a lot of fight back against, but there was back in the day. It was life and death struggle. So all those things taught me a great deal. Being in the Black Panther Party, even briefly, being part of radical movements of different types. And, all of this gave me strength to be able to resist being broken in the prisons, uh, gave me strength to understand what was being done in terms of the prisons, and gave me a way to fight back, and gave me a way to unite with others and politically educate others. That was important because then the struggle could carry on. The struggle can't carry on if there's no one there to carry on what you started. And so I was carrying out some of the things that Martin started, and other people that I came in contact with was carrying out stuff, the movements that we became part of inside the prison, even. So that's what I learned, and I carry those things to this day. When I got out of prison, I became an activist and organizer on the outside, and some of the things I learned in prison, I was able to utilize in the movements in the street.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that response. Definitely do not work with the state, y'all, if it hasn't been named explicitly. I think we're out of time, but maybe we can do one more question to balance the chat box supremacy. Maybe Yetunde, you raised your hand. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Lorenzo and Miss Geraldine for their contribution to our Black liberation struggle, for all your sacrifices. And and thank you for Dr. Tiana and William C. For being the bridge and carrying their story forward. Excuse me. And thank you, Natalie and Zach and Cipriano, for the existence of Black Lantern in our LA community. And you carry the legacy of Kwame and Nkrumah, Kwame Nkrumah, who helped to found books are at Black Lantern, and I just really appreciate knowing these stories. These stories are new to me, and I'm a Gen X. I'm 56, and I've been in different types of political struggles. And I'll also say that, I really appreciate Mr. Lorenzo for framing anarchism as an idea that is and can be embraced by Black folks, because I think a lot of times it is demonized, and I think that's what sort of kept me distant as well. And then as I have been in some of these struggles and fights and seen and been disillusioned as well, I've just tried to dig deeper. And so I just really appreciate the persistence at helping us be more, find the education and real deeper understanding and expansion of our political ideologies that I hope to help free us.
Thank you, Yetunde, for that. And thank you for participating in this, because honestly, we have these conversations among ourselves all the time, but it is so much more valuable in that tradition of Black radical and anarchist spaces for us to continue carrying these stories. That's how our ancestors live on forever, right? So just as we wrap up, just wanted to name, please follow and support the exoneration campaign for Miss Geraldine and Martin Sostre. Although it's posthumous for Martin Sostre, it is actually very much something that will impact not just Miss Geraldine Pointer, but the community that they helped shape in this space. So please do follow. Please follow the Black Autonomy podcast, where Lorenzo, Irvin, Jonina, Irwin and William work collaboratively to bring more of this. And for our bookstore here, for our little bookstore, we are today and for a few days, we're going to be the Afro-Asian Bookshop pop-up. So please come by. We have a number of really important Black anarchist texts and Black radical texts. You can pick up Garrett Felber's Continuous Struggle, super important book right now. And yeah, I see Zach, my other part of this co-op, just said follow and support the Black Autonomy. Excuse me. Lastly, we have in the library here, we have a copy of the Crime of Martin Sostre by Vince Copeland, who had written this book a long time ago about Martin Sostre while he was still incarcerated. And we are going to be making it available as like a printed one at the store pretty soon. This is a bit of a rare book. It's hard to find, and trying to make things accessible, these histories and these stories accessible. We've reprinted it with the permission of many folks. Has this great art on the cover. It's just like a replica of the old one. And if you're interested, it is on our at our website currently. Yeah, let's continue having these conversations for sure. I want to say in the sign off that I always hear from my one of my favorites, Lorenzo, is thank you for coming in Love and Struggle. Any last words from the rest of our panelists before we close? Oh, and William, maybe you want to talk about your upcoming book and like what projects you're working on?
People are asking how they can sign on to the Patreon and also how they can support Black Lantern.
Oh yeah, we can do a follow-up email with all this information as well. If you all signed up and you got an email alert, we can send a follow-up email in just a few minutes.
And there's no need for me to talk about myself any further. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This has been really fantastic. I appreciate everybody.
Thank you too.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to stop recording.